Right now, though, let's talk about Ukraine. Edward Lucas is a columnist at The Times and a security specialist and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Edward.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you so much. We've got these ceasefire talks in London and they're being held, but they have been downgraded, we're told, and will no longer include the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio or the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. He's maybe got a round of golf to play with Putin. Who knows? That's what he mostly seems to be famous for. Instead, the meeting will take place between senior officials with the UK, France, Germany, Ukraine and the US. And the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy is hosting a bilateral meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart. But a lot of this is about what Trump is proposing in terms of a ceasefire deal, which as far as I can tell isn't a ceasefire deal. It's a mass surrender deal, isn't it?
Well, Julia, I wish you were Secretary of State. I don't know whether you've played golf or not. You've put your finger on it, and this isn't a ceasefire, it's a surrender deal. It's where Russia gets basically everything it wants, and Ukraine gets next to nothing. And I think that what's going to happen today is the Ukrainians are going to say this is a bad deal, and their European allies are going to say it's a bad deal. And then the question is, what do the Americans do about that?
Yeah.
And the big worry is that Trump's basically decided he prefers Putin to his European allies. Yeah. And if he chooses to go down that path, we're going to find things getting very nasty very quickly.
I mean, it is absolutely fascinating how, he's made such a big play of this, Trump, in the election and others. Look, we're spending a load of money. They're not grateful. This is Europe's problem, not my problem. And I'm going to get peace straight away. And he's basically, handed the ball into the court of Vladimir Putin, who was just playing. I mean, he's literally just playing him like a puppet. But his thing, I've always wondered whether actually we just need to PR this. We need to get people on Fox News that Donald Trump watches religiously. It's pointing out that he looks weak. He's being laughed at by the world, and he looks like a weak surrenderer. What we call the French, the cheese-eating surrender monkeys, a McDonald's eating surrender monkey when it comes to this, and he looks weak compared to Vladimir Putin, because I think that might get him to sort of wake up to the reality. But they're basically talking about Putin keeping almost all the territory he sees from Ukraine, not just Crimea, but also the regions in the Donbass area region. But also Ukraine and the West recognising Crimea as Russian, not even a de facto, we freeze the fighting here but no further, but recognising Crimea as Russian. That would never be acceptable to the Ukrainian people.
It makes one wonder whether Trump's ever read the book called The Art of the Deal.
He didn't write it, we know that.
We know he didn't write it. I begin to wonder if he ever read it. I mean, it's a very weird negotiation where from the very beginning he's gone in handing over concessions to Russia, which might be things you'd have to give away as part of a deal. Will Ukraine join NATO this year, next year, sometime or never? That's a negotiating chip. Will we accept some kind of Russian de facto control over some Ukrainian territory? Again, might be, but to give all this stuff away at the beginning is bonkers, basically. And I think it's not going to fly.
Yeah.
So the question really is what happens when this proposal crashes and burns. And that's I think, terra incognita for us. We just don't know. We have no idea how.
Well, let's think about what the options are, because I can't see in any way that the European leaders who've stood firm with Zelensky over this and tried to stand up subtly and kindly as they can to Donald Trump, even Macron in the Oval Office, that they would agree to that. I mean, everyone I think is at a point where, if the US pull out, okay, the Europeans can't get their act together quickly enough to sort of actually carry on the fighting without US help. In which case, okay, you go for a ceasefire. But at that point, there has to be no legal recognition that Russia has that territory, just a settling of the lines right now. But crucially, there has to be a security guarantee that is absolutely 100% for the rest of the Ukrainian territory for them to ever be able to agree to that. That is not forthcoming from the US, doesn't appear to be. The Europeans basically aren't in a position to do that. This coalition of the willing seems to have gone remarkably quiet in the last few weeks. What are the options? If the Ukrainians say we're going to keep on fighting, then they're going to keep on fighting.
They are. And I think Trump hasn't perhaps realised that the Europeans contribute considerably more than the Americans do in cash terms. And you have countries like small countries who've done a huge amount relative to their size, also quite big countries that have done, Denmark's done a fantastic job. And there's plenty. What the Ukrainians need most of all now is money. They have a very good defence industry, probably the best defence industry in Europe. And what they most of all need is to run it at 100% capacity rather than half capacity.
Yeah.
So that's something.
Well, we could give them all of the Russian money, all the money that's been frozen in European banks. Hand that over tomorrow, no problem with that.
Well, we need to do that quick because the Hungarians are going to veto that next time the vote comes up on the freezing of that. So there's plenty we can do. I think the idea of putting Western troops or British or French or whatever troops into Ukraine is very questionable. If we weren't willing to do that when Ukraine was winning, why were we willing to do that when they're on the back foot? So that, I think, and what would happen if Russia attacks them? Do we send a cross press release? Do we shoot back or what? Yeah. And sadly, 30 years of neglect means that Europe's not in a state to do for Ukraine what we did for West Germany during the Cold War.
That is the worry, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Edward Lucas. He's a columnist at The Times and security specialist.